Chapter 5, Part 1 of Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel, by Guy de Maupassant. Translator unknown. Chapter 5, The First Intrigue. Part 1. 2 months elapsed. It was September. The fortune which Duroy had hoped to make so rapidly seemed to him slow in coming. Above all, he was dissatisfied with the mediocrity of his position. He was appreciated, but was treated according to his rank. Forestier himself no longer invited him to dinner and treated him as an inferior. Often he had thought of making Madame Forestier a visit, but the remembrance of their last meeting restrained him. Madame de Marelle had invited him to call, saying, "I am always at home about 3 o'clock." So one afternoon, when he had nothing to do, he proceeded toward her house. She lived on Rue Verneuil, on the 4th floor. A maid answered his summons and said, "Yes, Madame is at home, but I do not know whether she has risen." She conducted Duroy into the drawing room, which was large, poorly furnished, and somewhat untidy. The shabby, threadbare chairs were ranged along the walls according to the servant's fancy, for there was not a trace visible of the care of a woman who loves her home. Duroy took a seat and waited some time. Then a door opened and Madame de Marelle entered hastily, clad in a Japanese dressing gown. She exclaimed, "Kind of you to come to see me. I was positive you had forgotten me." She held out her hand to him with a gesture of delight, and Duroy, quite at his ease in that shabby apartment, kissed it as he had seen Norbert de Varenne do. Examining him from head to foot, she cried, "How you have changed! Well, tell me the news." They began to chat at once as if they were old acquaintances, and in 5 minutes an intimacy, a mutual understanding was established between those 2 beings alike in character and kind. Suddenly the young woman said in surprise, "It is astonishing how I feel with you. It seems to me as if I had known you 10 years. We shall undoubtedly become good friends. Would that please you?" He replied, "Certainly," with a smile more expressive than words. He thought her very bewitching in her pretty gown. When near Madame Forestier, whose impassive, gracious smile attracted, yet held at a distance, and seemed to say, "I like you, yet take care," he felt a desire to cast himself at her feet, or to kiss the hem of her garment. When near Madame de Marelle, he felt a more passionate desire. A gentle rap came at the door through which Madame de Marelle had entered, and she cried, "You may come in, my darling." The child entered, advanced to Duroy, and offered him her hand. The astonished mother murmured, "That is a conquest." The young man, having kissed the child, seated her by his side, and with a serious air questioned her as to what she had done since they last met. She replied in a flute-like voice and with the manner of a woman. The clock struck 3. The journalist rose. Come often, said Mme. de Marelle. It has been a pleasant causerie. I shall always be glad to welcome you. Why do I never meet you at the Forestiers? For no particular reason. I am very busy. I hope, however, that we shall meet there one of these days. In the course of a few days, he paid another visit to the enchantress. The maid ushered him into the drawing room, and Laurine soon entered. She offered him not her hand, but her forehead, and said, "Mamma wishes me to ask you to wait for her for about 15 minutes, for she is not dressed. I will keep you company." Duroy, who was amused at the child's ceremonious manner, replied, "Indeed, mademoiselle, I shall be enchanted to spend a quarter of an hour with you." When the mother entered, they were in the midst of an exciting game, and Mme. de Marelle paused in amazement, crying, "Laurine playing! You are a sorcerer, sir." He placed the child, whom he had caught in his arms, upon the floor, kissed the lady's hand, and they seated themselves, the child between them. They tried to converse, but Laurine, usually so silent, monopolized the conversation, and her mother was compelled to send her to her room. When they were alone, Mme. de Marelle lowered her voice and said, "I have a great project. It is this. As I dine every week at the Forestiers, I return it from time to time by inviting them to a restaurant. I do not like to have company at home. I am not so situated that I can have any. I know nothing about housekeeping or cooking. I prefer a life free from care. Therefore I invite them to the cafe occasionally. But it is not lively when we are only 3. I am telling you this in order to explain such an informal gathering. I should like you to be present at our Saturdays at the Café Riche at 7:30. Do you know the house?" Duroy accepted gladly. He left her in a transport of delight and impatiently awaited the day of the dinner. He was the first to arrive at the